Good morning. The hearing board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is in session. Today is Thursday, March 22nd, 2018. The time is 9:00 a.m. We are meeting in the hearing board room in Diamond Bar. We have one change to the schedule today. SCAQMD versus Dynamic Powder Coating, case number 6102-1 has been rescheduled to April 17th due to current compliance with the rules. We have one matter left on for today, and that is SCAQMD versus Torrance Refining Company, case number 6060-5 for status report and possible modification of the order for abatement. And who is representing the executive officer today?
Daphne Seifert, Executive Officer.
Thank you. And who is representing Torrance Refining?
Good morning. Michael McDonough here for Torrance Refining.
Good morning. Okay, so we have received status hearing statement, and we don't have to mark it because it was filed in this case. And I'm going to ask how we want to proceed. Ms. Sue, do you want to start with an opening statement?
Yes, please. Good morning, members of the board. After a smoking flaring event following an October 2016 power outage, the Torrance Refinery agreed to make improvements to its facility. Since our last status hearing on September 28, 2017, on the stipulated order for abatement, the refinery has completed two major evaluations, one of its safety critical devices and two of its critical utility systems. Pursuant to Condition 3, the refinery evaluated its safety critical devices to see if any needed a UPS, that is, a battery backup. The refinery identified those devices that need a UPS and will install the UPS by November 13, 2018. Pursuant to Condition 4, the refinery also evaluated its critical utility systems and identified improvements it would make with its instrument air system and its steam system. Some of these improvements can be made by November 13, 2018, and others will be completed by the end of the next turnaround in 2019. Of particular importance, the refinery will improve one of its boilers, known as its aux boiler, to enable its continued operations for 30 minutes after a power outage. The ability to continue to produce steam would reduce opacity during flaring after a power outage. We understand the refinery will present a witness to testify today as to its progress. The district is not planning to present a witness today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sue. Mr. McDonough, your opening.
Yeah, I think Ms. Sue said it all. I would just say, again, this is, if you may recall from last year, the proposed 220 kilovolt project that will involve multiple actions, including installing new service, new switching station, and certain other replacements and upgrades, which, as you recall, the goal of this whole project is to help improve the reliability of the refinery and ultimately help insulate them from Southern California Edison power outages, which we strongly believe will help us stay out of flaring and avoid the flaring that comes along with outages. So, and I will let our witness, Mr. Sneer, describe to you where we're at. Thanks.
Excellent. Mr. Sneer, if you'd like to stand to be sworn in, and anyone else who plans to testify, including if there are any members of the public who wish to testify today, please, this would be the time to stand and be sworn in. Please raise your right hand. You promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. Excellent. Mr. McDonough, you may introduce Mr. Sneer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sneer, could you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Mayor Sneer.
And if you could just spell your last name for us.
S-N-I-R.
Okay, and Mr. Sneer, could you describe your involvement with the 220 kilovolt project at the refinery?
As the reliability manager for the Torrance Refinery, the 220 kV electrical reliability enhancement project falls under my jurisdiction. So I have intimate involvement with the project.
Okay, and can you confirm for the board that you have read the status report that was most recently filed with the hearing board and verified that everything in that report is true and correct?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Let's just start with a simple question. How's compliance with the order gone since our last meeting in September of last year?
Compliance has gone very, very well. and I can say that for the following reasons. First, we continue to enjoy unprecedented cooperation from SCE. This manifests itself in daily communication, sometimes more often than daily, weekly technical and engineering reviews, and monthly management updates and review. As of January 8, 2018, SCE and PBF has entered into an agreement to kick off the detailed engineering of the project. You recall the project is the one that will eventually prevent any of these or most of these flaring. And we anticipate completion of that phase, of the detailed engineering phase, by the end of fourth quarter 2018.
Okay, and
May I just interrupt for 1 second, Mr. Sneer? If, for the record, for the clerk, can you please spell your first name and just restate your title? I'm not sure if you did that, and then if you can continue.
Sure. First name is Meir, M-E-I-R. I am the Torrance Refinery Reliability Manager, and I have a Master's of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering, and I'm also licensed and registered professional engineer with the state of California.
okay, and Mr. Sneer, how is the refinery doing in meeting all of the deadlines contained in the order?
The project continues to be on target, on schedule. Progress is being made, and we anticipate completion by the end of fourth quarter 2018. We met so far all the deadlines and all commitment that we have made in the abatement orders.
Okay, so in the interest of efficiency, I'll have you focus on the changes since the last hearing, and really we're going to focus on conditions 3 and 4 of the stipulated abatement order. Let's start with condition 3. If you recall, this is a condition that requires us to do a safety critical device evaluation. Explain to us where that process is, and has that evaluation been completed?
We have evaluated approximately 2,000 safety critical devices. Of the 2,000, we have found roughly 225 devices refinery-wide that, in our opinion, may require a UPS addition to the current setup. This project is already funded and underway, and we anticipate completion by November 2018.
Okay, so just to take a step back, this evaluation of safety critical devices that don't have uninterruptible power, this evaluation was completed November of last year?
Correct.
Okay, and this is an evaluation you provided to the district?
It was submitted to the district, correct.
Okay. In these changes, these roughly 225 device changes you're talking about, will any of those changes, do you anticipate, require a permit revision or turnaround?
We do not.
Okay.
The reason being that they're redundant and we can install it without having to require a permit. The system is already in operation.
Okay, and as you mentioned, the installations of these units are already underway?
Underway, that's
Okay.
correct.
Let's talk about then condition 4. Recall, this is the condition in the order that required the refinery to evaluate potential feasible, cost-effective upgrades to the critical utility systems that would enable you to continue operation for some time in the event of a Edison power outage. Again, can you generally describe to us the status of that evaluation?
So we have completed the evaluation, and we have determined that we have a way to supply steam to flare up to about 30 minutes with modification of equipment that we have currently in operation.
Okay, so again, just to back up, this evaluation was completed also in November of last year?
That's correct.
And shared with the
It
district?
was submitted to the district.
Okay. You talked about upgrades to the auxiliary boiler or aux boiler at the refinery. Help us to understand how it is the aux boiler upgrades would allow delivery of steam for up to 30 minutes.
So this boiler produces sufficient steam for two key points. The first one is to supply its own steam as needed to operate the boiler. And the second part, to provide sufficient steam to the flare to minimize and reduce the time during flaring event.
Okay, and this is a 1,200-pound boiler?
It's a 1,200-pound boiler, 180,000 pound per hour.
And on what basis did the refinery select this boiler as the target boiler to do these upgrades on?
First of all, the boiler is already in place, and so the issue is how we can manage the steam during an event that it's needed, and directing all the steam to the flare. So it is the simplest way to provide the steam to flare. Delivering steam from a temporary boiler or any additional boiler will require permitting, will add additional emission. So this seems to be the most practical and the quickest way to implement.
And I know we talked about this at the original hearing, but just to reiterate, in a typical power outage from Southern California Edison, do those outages typically last more than 30 minutes?
No, the longest that we have experienced on record was 26 minutes. All the other ones are a matter of a fraction of a second, typically up to 6 or 7 cycles. You recall there are 60 cycles per second. So it's a very, very quick event. But during these short events, we may still experience several pieces of equipment tripping off.
Okay, so even in a fraction of a second loss of power, you might still lose equipment?
That's correct.
Okay. And that loss of equipment can lead to the flaring you talked about in the last hearing?
That's correct.
Okay. There were a few other reviews required by the order, one of which was to require that the facility look at enhancements, potential enhancements to the nitrogen system, to the instrument air system, and upgrading procedures. Did you come to any conclusions with respect to that review?
That's correct. We have looked at all the other systems, such as the one you mentioned, the nitrogen and air, and have engaged outside consultant from Fluor, and have determined that our system is adequate to service.
Okay. In terms of how this work will be done, will you require a turnaround to implement the aux boiler upgrades?
So some of the modification can be done between now and the next outage, but some of the modification will require waiting until.
I have to make this announcement at every hearing. We don't know where that's coming from. It should be done in about 10 seconds. 3 more rings. So
that's
if you
strange.
want to just hold it so that we can hear you well, I apologize. It'll happen in the afternoon if we're still here too.
Did you get on the do not call list? That's the most important thing, yeah. Okay. So let me just restate the question, Mr. Sneer. So you were talking about whether any of this work in the aux boiler system would require turnaround.
So some of the stuff can be taken care of between now and the next outage, but some of the stuff will require the shutdown, which is currently scheduled for early 2019.
Okay. And again, just to reiterate, and we did talk about this in earlier hearings, but in addition to the aux work, can you refresh the board on the main source of mitigation of flaring and opacity above and beyond the boiler?
Yeah, so the key to solving the problem of flaring is prevention. And the way we are addressing prevention is through this 220 kV project. We believe that well over 90% of these flaring events can be avoided by upgrading our electrical system, and that's why we are so focused and working already onto that 220 kV delivery to the refinery.
Okay, and I'll ask you the same question as condition 3. Is the facility still on tap to meet all of the deadlines in the order with respect to the aux boiler upgrades?
Yes, we are.
Okay, and at this point, I would leave the rest of the time for the board to ask questions.
Thank you. Ms. Su, do you have any questions?
I have a few clarifying questions. One for, could you please describe what are safety critical devices in general, or provide some examples?
Say it again, please.
Could you please provide some examples of what are the safety critical devices which
So
you will be
safety
installing?
critical device in general can be any device that is the last line of defense before a much bigger problem will take place. An example is the relief valve in a refinery. If the pressure is building up to the point that the equipment cannot tolerate that, it will relieve itself. Flare is another example. That is a safety device to allow removal of the pressure condition of the gases from the system, preventing a much bigger problem. Some of the electrical devices may be a system that will allow steam to be directed from the boiler into the flare rather than dissipate the steam through units that are not critical for mitigating the flaring event.
And you had said there are about 225 devices that you will be installing in UPS. Can you describe some of those categories of devices?
Some of these devices are motor-driven valves that operate as a result of a signal, electrical signal, and then the motor is activated. And at the moment, they may or may not have the backup in case an event takes place and we need to close or open that valve. So that's just an example.
Okay. And moving to the aux boiler, can you describe the work that will be done on the aux boiler?
So it's a complicated collection of items that require upgrades, such as making sure that the steam that is produced by the boiler is delivered to the flare and not going to areas that may not be critical to receive the steam. So these are a system of valves and connection to make sure the valves are operating and limiting the steam for two things. One, to keep that aux boiler in operation. So that will be steam to turbines that run the boiler feed water pumps, so the boiler can receive and continue receiving water to convert the water into steam, as well as then providing the steam to the flaring event.
And for this particular boiler, it was chosen partly because, is it correct that it was chosen partly because the other boilers use electricity more than this boiler?
When you select a boiler, you have to look at the capacity of the boiler. So first of all, this boiler has all the capacity necessary to deliver the steam to the flare. But you also have to keep in mind that I need some of the steam to operate my equipment, such as these pumps via the turbine. So first of all, that boiler meets all the criteria. The second thing, the boiler is already in operation. So I don't need to get anything in addition to that boiler that may produce emission, and I may require permitting that make the whole process a lot longer to achieve. So this seems to be like a very simple, easy solution for delivering the steam to the flare.
Okay, thank you very much.
Board members, questions for Mr. Sneer? I just have a few. Have there been any flaring events due to power outage since the last hearing?
Since the last hearing, we had one event, November 17th. That was a power dip, not a power outage, but power dip. During that event, we flared for 23 minutes, but there was no opacity, and we did not receive any complaints. I checked on that yesterday. We received no complaints from the public.
Okay, so there was no black smoke or issues with that. And can you just remind us, so that I know I have this 100% clear, the auxiliary boiler upgrades for the steam, that is to ensure that the opacity of any flaring event is, that there is limited opacity of any flaring event.
That's correct.
And then all the upgrades to the electrical system and safety, battery backup, all of that is to, as you said, prevent the flaring in the first place?
That's correct. If I can explain that the way to avoid these flaring events in first place is installing the 220 kV project in. The auxiliary boiler is a second layer of protection in the unlikely event that we're going to have it. And I think I testified last time that the likelihood of that event to take place is 1 in 300 years. That's dramatically fewer events once we install the 220 kV. This is why it's so critical for us to install that 220 kV system in.
Excellent. And then you had mentioned the end of the fourth quarter 2018. Was that for, I'm sorry, for all of your engineering will be finished?
So, sorry, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wanted
to answer. I apologize.
Of course.
That is correct. The schedule for the detailed engineering, and we expect to have 85 to 90% of the engineering completed by then, which will allow us to start ordering the material and actually start doing field construction to be done by the end of fourth quarter this year.
Okay. And then I look back at my notes from the last hearing, and I thought, I'm not sure if I had it correct, that you estimated total project completion at that time for 24 to 28 months. I don't know if that sounds correct to you.
That is still, 27 months is plus or minus a month is pretty much what we estimate the project to take.
Oh, from now?
Then on, yeah.
Okay, so,
And keep in mind that a lot of the items that we need to order, like these are very large transformers, take a year to fabricate or longer.
okay. But in the meantime, things like the safety critical device UPS backup, that will be put into place. Of course, the the aux boiler upgrades and things like
That's
that. So
correct.
we're moving along, even if the final completion isn't for
That's correct.
a while. Is there any other issues that you see that are foreseeable, that we should know about or just discuss on the record?
At the moment, I do not see any obstacles or any issue because we do not need any permitting for that except a permit for the 220, which will be going to the California Public Utility Commission once we have more of the detail engineering in hand. But I do not see any major obstacles right now. We have the support of the city, we have the support of the district, support and cooperation from SC, so I do not see any showstoppers right now.
That's always good to hear. Anyone else have questions for Mr. Sneer? Ms. Byrd?
I just wanted to confirm that you said you checked to see if you had received any complaints. Were you checking just with your office, or were you checking with the district as well?
I checked with my office, with our public relation yesterday. They looked at the record, and there were no calls.
Okay. And you don't have any idea if the district has received?
That's correct.
Excuse me. Also, with your public relations, just, do you continue to do outreach, or was it just at the beginning?
Do continue.
Okay.
And we have on our website an update to the 220 kV project and the fact that we have entered the agreement with SCE. And so we continue to have the outreach to the public, yeah, including public meeting with the city and the county.
And I'm sure you told me this last time, but how frequently are those meetings?
I meet with the refinery manager and the city on a monthly basis.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Lerner?
Sounds wonderful. Do you have a planned, sort of like quarterly or semi-annually public meeting that is noticed so that the community, especially the community and more proximal to the refinery, has an opportunity to query you and to hear the progress that you're making, such as you described this morning?
We have a quarterly CAP meeting, which is Citizen Action Panel, probably 30, 40 individuals across the city, and we update and give them a chance to ask any questions, which include the project, the 220 kV project. As you can imagine, it's a very, there's a high interest in where the project stands.
Any other questions? Senator, do you have questions?
The best of my recollection, that we had a shortage because of Southern California Edison had a shortage in the pole, that the bird or something, I recall.
We actually track every one of these events
Right.
and communicate to SCE. The majority of events that I can recall are Mylar balloons or fog, sometimes the fog.
Right, right.
But the Mylar balloons, by far, are the largest number of triggering events.
So when that happens in you don't have any power at the site, at the plant site.
We have what we call a power dip. What happens during that event when there's a short, the SCE system transferred the power from one system to another. But during the transfer of power, we may suffer a small dip in the voltage, which may result in some of our equipment to trip offline. The
It's
220 kV project will completely avoid that because we're not going to be subject to these balloons and birds and fog and other weather conditions.
That's your backup.
The 220 kV will be directly, it is 100% redundant system from two different sources. We should not see any of these events that happen right now on our 66 kV system, which is the delivery power to the refinery.
No, I don't recall, but maybe you can tell me. When is that 220 kV to be completely installed, given all the permits that you're going to need and so, and changing permits?
So we anticipate completion of the detailed engineering, which is underway right now, by the end of this year, by fourth quarter 2018. At that point, we will start the procurement of the equipment and field work, which will take another, let's say, 27 months from that date on.
Yeah, I think we were here last. I started adding up the time, the dates for completing a certain events in the project. It amounted to years before you would have this in place, finalized.
The 1 year is to get all the engineering in place. That 27 months is beyond that because we have to submit our application to the Public Utility Commission, get their approval, which we believe we will get because SCE is in full support of that. But that takes, all of this takes time also to the fabrication of the transformer, of these cables, the breakers. I don't think we can do it in less than 27 months.
So now we're looking at about 4 or 5 years so far.
Well, it will be 2.5 years, say, from
1 year plus 27 months.
yeah, for total project, yeah.
Yeah, and then of course any delay would have to add that on for various reasons.
But keep in mind that in the meanwhile, this is why we're addressing the auxiliary boiler to step in the event that we do have to flare.
In the first part of you discussed you didn't discuss the fact that you submitted reports addressing the mean time to failure, mean time to repair.
That's correct.
You didn't address that, all the reports and
So
nobody talked about that so
But
far.
I can talk about it. So
Thank you, sir.
I can, this item discussed in the previous hearing, what we have modeled the system, and we anticipate at least 13-fold improvement. Right now, we're experiencing approximately one significant event per year. That will change it to one event in 13 years. The second thing, so one of them is mean time to failure and one is mean time to repair. The mean time to repair is expected to be reduced by at least 70%. So even if there is an event, the duration to fix and correct the issue will be reduced by 70%.
The mean time to failure, tell me that again. Walk me through that, please.
The mean time between failure, currently the mean time between failure is about once a year. This will move to being once in 13 years,
When?
at least.
When will that happen?
Once the 27 months implementation
After 27 months, or after a number of years have come and gone?
Yeah.
And then the repair takes so much time beyond that?
It will, the repair is part of the same improvement. The time to fix any equipment that breaks down is going to be 70% lesser.
So what I'm hearing is that there's no high hopes to have this thing resolved in the near future. It's going to take years before you can accomplish what you want.
You can look at this as 2.5 years from, say, January 2019. But we're already going to have by then some improvement because of the auxiliary boiler being in place by early 2019, fully implemented. So you'll see improvement in the duration of the flaring and improvement in the opacity of the flare.
All right.
Dr. Lerner has a question.
Reiterate what you said. Basically, what you're saying about this time, the spring, in 3 years from now, we're going to be done. I mean, the Torrance will be finished. Right now, what I wanted you to reiterate the point you just made. When will the auxiliary boiler be operational to step in transiently to help with a dip or an outage?
And that's going to be during the scheduled outage in early 2019. By then, everything is going to be in place, all the system operational, and if and when we need that steam to go to the flare, the system will be diverted to the
So
flare,
what you're saying, approximately a year from now?
approximately a year.
Okay. So a year from now, we can say that if there's an unfortunate event, a flare, that the flare will not be an opacified flare.
It'll be significantly less opacity, and the duration of flaring is going to be significantly less.
Okay. I know you can't estimate how diminished the opacity will be, but could you give us a ballpark number using the last one as 100%? Is it going to be 70%, diminished by 70%, or what? Just your comments.
It's so difficult to quantify because it also depends on the amount and the volume of the hydrocarbon gas that I'm trying to evacuate. If it's going to be relatively small, it's probably going to take care of the whole thing. If I have an event like this 26-minute shutdown where I have to evacuate the entire refinery, we're going to be flaring, and you're going to see some opacity. But you're going to see dramatic reduction in the opacity because the steam is going to help and facilitate the combustion of this particulate matter. Yeah. If I wish I could answer that, if I knew how to answer that better, I probably would have been a world consultant on that. It's extremely difficult to quantify that.
Any other questions for Mr. Sneer? Senator?
I'd like to be able to look at those reliability reports that the district has received. You have received them according to this report.
Could you please repeat what you just said?
I'd like to have a copy of those reports addressing reliability, mean time to failure, mean time to repair. You do have that, don't you?
I may not have them with me. Does council have any objection to
No, yeah, I mean, the district is free to share whatever it wants with the board. This is in relation, I believe, to condition 1, which we talked about principally at the last hearing, but you might have it from that package.
I would have to look in my files for what reports were provided.
You have it already.
I know, but I may not have them physically on me at this point.
Senator, you may recall that at the last status hearing in September of 2017, this issue was discussed, so I think what council is saying is that they did not come prepared to bring them today, because that was discussed at the last hearing, and we may have received it, I think Mr. McDonough had mentioned, but we can, at the end of the hearing, talk about a way or a vehicle that the board can have those to review.
Just to share my thoughts with you, it was discussed when the matter was before us, very beginning. I kept raising that issue. I did. And so what
I realize that, but I'm just saying that at the last hearing,
I still want to share my
it was
thoughts.
reported to us.
I want to share my thoughts. My thought is that there will be another hearing, I'm sure. And between now and then, or ASAP, I'd like to have a copy of that report that's been submitted to the district as part of the requirements in the stipulated agreement. That's all. It's a reasonable request.
Absolutely, Senator. And so what I was going to say was at the end of this hearing, we are likely to, we may take no action on the actual order. However, we are likely to set another hearing date and to discuss what that date should be. I have an idea in my mind. And if you want to wait till then, otherwise you can just request, and I'm sure the parties will submit, will happily submit as just part of the minute order. So we wouldn't have to actually amend the order itself. Any other questions for Mr. Sneer? Thank you. Mr. McDonough, any other witnesses you wish to present today?
Not at this time.
Okay. Is there any member of the public who wishes to be heard today? Seeing none. Would you like to make any closing, Ms. Sue?
The refinery has shown that it is abiding by the abatement order. In particular, the refinery has evaluated its steam system and will make permanent improvements to its aux boiler to enable it to continue to provide steam for up to 30 minutes after a power outage. This will help reduce opacity, that is, any smoking during flaring. We request the next status hearing be held next year to further update the hearing board on progress under the abatement order, possibly March 21st, 2019. I believe at that point in time, many of the improvements will already be made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonough.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Board members, I think what we're hearing today from both parties and also what we read in the status hearing statement that we were presented with in advance of the hearing is that this particular order continues to go well in terms of full compliance with each of the very complex provisions and conditions of the stipulated order, that Torrance Refinery continues to be on track, and most importantly, that whereas before we heard this case at all and it was brought before us, there wasn't a lot of coordination with SCE, and there were a number of outages and flaring events, which is why the district brought this case in the first place, to try to get it reconciled. Now we're hearing, at the last hearing and also at this hearing, excellent cooperation between the city, SCE, the district, which has greatly minimized the flaring events. We heard at the last hearing, status hearing, that in that past 11 months there were no flaring events due to outages, and today we heard since that last hearing 6 months ago, there has been one dip in outage with flaring event that was minimized and had no opacity. So obviously there's been, that's due, the only change really, other than all the engineering, has been the coordination, especially with SCE. So given that things seem to be going well, it is unfortunate that a project of this magnitude does take so long, which is why there are those interim measures to upgrade the aux boiler, and they had to do the review of the critical utility system upgrades and the safety critical devices, identifying about 225 that will get UPS battery backup by November of this year. We heard it was fully funded, and we heard that there is outreach to the public, and at least from what we're hearing, really not a lot of public concern being expressed. And so I would, aside from setting a new date to come back, and for any information that the senator or anyone else would like to have, that we do not take any action today. Senator, did you want to add?
I think that you already agreed to provide the reports, meantime, reliability reports. That's fine.
Right, we'll ask
Yeah,
the
you do
parties
that.
for that.
The other thing I think is of concern is the timeline. In the report, it says once the engineering is done, you apply for permits from the city. There may be some delay in terms of checking the engineering. And so we'd like to have an idea, more realistic idea, as when this project be complete based on what's required in terms of complying with the city's request or the state, et cetera, or the district. So we need to make sure that timeline is maintained, or if it's extended, so state that it's been extended and the cause for the extension.
I think that's a very good point, and I was going to suggest, I know that the parties have suggested March as the next status hearing, but I was going to suggest perhaps early January for our next status hearing, because by then all of the engineering will be done, and I believe we will have a much better idea from the parties at that point, the timeline, because I think the timeline is changing a little bit, and I can understand why it's a very lengthy timeline, and as Senator, you point out, there are so many unknowns at this point. So that was going to be my suggestion. I was going to ask the parties what they thought. But was there something else, aside from the meantime report, are you, and a return where we would ask that specific question, was there anything else you wanted the parties to present to us? Was it?
This time.
Not at this time?
January, maybe.
In January, maybe, okay. Anyone else want to add to the discussion, especially on the date of return? Ms. Byrd?
Once again, I guess I try to change the date. Early January, I think, might be a little rough if they're saying that fourth quarter was when their engineering studies will be done, because there's going to be holidays and there's going to be other things. So maybe the end of January?
Senator?
I didn't hear any objection from the respondents on the date that you were considering. So I think you said early January, they didn't object.
Well, we didn't ask them. So let's go to each of them, and in particular, I think let's begin with Mr. McDonough and the refinery, and based on what Ms. Byrd just said with regard to when you'll have those reports handy and ready to respond, what would be the better date?
Sure, and I'll let Mr. Sneer jump in if I say anything untoward here, but I'm being told that end of January, we could come back and report to you. Like you said, the engineering reports will be done in December, and so January will be primarily devoted to testing out, making sure that things are working the way we expect. So certainly, we're happy to report to the board at any time. It's just that at that time, we'll tell you where things stand. And if there's anything left to be done, we'll let you know that at that time too. So, we can certainly do end of January.
I see that there's a January 23rd is a Wednesday, and January 30th is a Wednesday, and between those two, is there a preferential date? Ms. Sue as well.
Either date would work for the district.
Okay, Mr. McDonough?
I actually, my schedule, I can only do the 30th
Okay.
of those two.
Then I am going to, at this time, recommend to the board that we take no action, but that we set the next status hearing and modification for January 30th, Wednesday, January 30th, and we do so by minute order. And that as part of that, Senator, I'm so sorry. Did you say you wanted to wait and see those meantime reports then or now? Okay, now. Mañana. And if I can request of Mr. McDonough to provide to the board, how long do you think it would take to just provide copies to the board?
We can provide you a copy today or tomorrow. If it's just the ETAP report, which I think is what the senator is talking about, that is a report we previously provided to Ms. Sue, we're happy to provide it to you. I assume the district has no objection to sharing that report.
No objection.
Yeah.
And Madam Clerk, there was an issue with some papers coming in on a different matter by email. What would you like it by email? Be fine for distribution? Okay. So what we'll do is we'll have it sent to the clerk via email, and the clerk will distribute it to board members via email. Okay. If that's acceptable to board members.
Ms. Chair, I'm being told that parts of the ETAP report, I think the attachments may be voluminous, so I don't know if that will make your email system choke. If it does, we can provide a flash drive. Maybe that would be the best way to provide it if you want it electronically. We can obviously always do it by hard copy, but I think you'd probably prefer to have it electronically.
I think so.
Yeah.
If we can, one version electronically, and then is it for distribution for all board members?
It is, but we could do so, I guess we cannot do so electronically. Well, how voluminous are we speaking? I don't know that we want to kill a forest. Perhaps, can we receive flash drives? I think we would prefer that.
Right, yeah.
Perhaps, Mr. McDonough, flash drives as opposed to trees?
Yeah.
Is that okay, Senator? To have it on a flash drive that you can put for your computer? No, you don't have to print it. Would you like a printed copy? I want a printed copy. Okay.
We can provide a printed copy. We're happy to work with you and do it any way you'd like. I think probably electronically would save trees.
Okay, so right now, if there's any, Senator would like it in hard copy. Dr. Lerner? Okay.
No, excuse me, I'll take the flash drive.
And I know Ms. Byrd and Mr. Cameron. So one copy for the clerk, you need one hard copy? Okay. 2 hard copies, please. One for the senator and one for the clerk, and we will then take flash drives. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm not either, but my husband is, he'll help. Okay, so any other discussion, or we'll just set the next hearing and continue this matter to January 30th? Okay, oh, Dr. Lerner.
I don't know if it's possible, but as I look at this material, it's very complicated, much more so than I thought. So if somehow you could, in a form of a cartoon, a diagram, or a timeline, when we meet next year, if you could provide that summary of what happened and, I mean, what you've accomplished, and then you will tell us the results of your meeting in the fourth quarter. That would be really, and in a way, that will save a lot of flipping through pages.
We can do that.
Right, so in addition to a status hearing statement, which we always file and will file for that one as well, we'll look at doing maybe something graphical that might help to, we'll provide that as an exhibit to the status hearing statement.
Thank you, Mr. McDonough. We appreciate that. Anyone else? Mr. Camarena.
Yes, thank you. I'm pleased with the progress that's been made so far. This is a technically very complex project, takes a long time, requires a lot of coordination, and looks like it's going well.
Excellent. So we are continued to January 30th, 2019, and any other business board members? If not, we are adjourned for the day. Thank you all.
Thank you. Stay dry.